Okay, so this is the last part of the lecture on soil fauna, and we're now focusing on earthworms. As I did for the two other parts, here are a few questions that you should be focusing on as we move forward. First one is, how can we classify earthworm species? Second is, how are earthworms invading North America? Also, how earthworms can be used as an indicator for soil health and soil quality, and also a question of, like, should we use them as an indicator of soil health? And last but not least, how are invasive earthworms affecting soil carbon stocks and how they are affecting soil carbon stocks? As an introduction, here are a few facts about earthworms that I find interesting. They've been recognized as important soil engineers since Aristotle, who described them as the intestines of the soil a really long time ago. And maybe you don't know, but Darwin studied earthworms for 40 years and published a book about them. We find earthworms in almost every type of ecosystem except very extreme climates, such as desert or permafrost. And we usually recognize them as an indicator of soil health. If you guys have a garden, you might be happy to see worms in your garden because it means it's a healthy garden and there is bioturbation happening. But as we will see later in this lecture, this soil health indicator might be only valid for agricultural soils. Earthworms are classified in 3 different ecological groups depending on their feeding behavior and habitat. You can pretty much compare this to what I explained for termites earlier on. So we have epigeic earthworms that live in the forest floor and they feed on litter. They're usually small and their impact on the soil profile is limited as they don't really mix different soil layers and they stay on the surface. Endogeeic earthworms live in the mineral soil, but they stay in surface layers and they feed on mineral soil that contains decaying organic matter. So they don't really affect the forest floor and their impact on mineral soil is limited to surface horizons. But now the anasic earthworms, they live in deep burrows and they feed on litter. They have a huge impact on the entire soil profile as they bring organic matter from the forest floor down to deep soil layers. And this is pretty much bioturbation. So when we talk about earthworms and the impact they have on soils, it's important to consider what kind of species we're talking about. Because if we're interested in bioturbation, it's mainly performed by anasic species. In order to assess earthworm impact, we need to first estimate the population density by sampling. And there are different methods that we can use for earthworm sampling. We can do hand sorting of soil or litter over a specific area. We would just like dig out over a specific area and hand sort the whole soil. We can also use hot mustard, as I mentioned in the first part of this lecture, and also as you saw in the YouTube video I posted. So hot mustard is a good example of a behavioral method using a repellent. We can also do indirect estimates using casts. For instance, you can just count how many casts you see on the soil. But an important question to ask if we do direct measurements is, how do we report these results? Because we can count the number of individuals, but some of them are bigger than others. So maybe a better way to do it would be to estimate the total biomass on a dry weight basis. But these are just a few options, and that's why it's complex, because there are so many methods. The earthworm dilemma is a concept focusing on the impacts of earthworms on greenhouse gas emissions. If we just focus on carbon for a moment, in the soil, there is this paradox that the benefits of soil carbon come from the decay of organic matter, which feeds the soil food web and releases nutrients to the soil for plant growth. But at the same time, we also want to conserve organic matter in the soil and increase soil carbon stocks for global carbon balance. Earthworms are a great illustration of this paradox. They have the potential to help stabilize organic carbon, but by increasing decomposition and microbial activity first. So let's look at this flowchart. Earthworms eat fresh litter together with mineral particles. Their gut microbiome uses carbon as an energy source, releasing CO2. And earthworms also respire, releasing CO2 as well as N2O. The fresh aggregates that are formed in earthworm casts are rich in organic matter, so rich in organic carbon. These aggregates have increased microbial activity because of the fresh labile carbon available, releasing again CO2 and N2O. But at the same time, a fraction of this carbon will be stabilized in the long run in smaller micro aggregates, which is beneficial for the soil carbon balance. So as you can tell, the results of these processes can be positive or negative for the soil carbon balance. And that depends on the intensity of each of these processes. And there's still a lot of uncertainties. So if we focus on North America now for a bit, you probably know that already, but earthworms are not native to North America for the most part. Their invasion started with European settlement, so most of species found in Canada are European species. But there is also a second, more recent invasion with Asian species. They're invading all North American forests, including hardwood and boreal forests. And boreal forests are really understudied compared to hardwood forests. By the way, the video that I posted on earthworm invasion is focusing on hardwood forests, and the impacts are pretty similar to what we see in the boreal, but there is not enough research happening to double check all those facts. In terms of how those earthworms are invading and how they're spreading, there are different mechanisms identified, but if we look at the boreal forest in Alberta, there are two major mechanisms. First one is fishing, because people use earthworms as baits, and because there's so many lakes in Alberta, they tend to just release earthworms by the lake once they're done fishing. And the second important mechanism is road construction, because there is a lot of soil being transported and mixed, and that's helping the spread a lot. In terms of implications at the landscape level and for the ecosystem, the video I ask you to watch is a really good example. So in terms of changes for vegetation, earthworms are eating the rooting zone. So they destroy soil structure, and it has consequences for the establishment of new plants. If you remember from the video, the zone that was highly infested with earthworms had a very sparse understory vegetation compared to the uninfested zone. So that shows that the effects of earthworms on forests in general is larger than just soil structure. It has a lot of repercussions. But if we look at the soil profile more specifically, on the left we have a lightly infested zone where there is still a thick forest floor, and we can still see the different soil horizons. They're well delimited and unmixed. But as the infestation advances, the forest floor is disappearing and the plant roots are exposed. We also see lots of signs of bioturbations, and compared to the lightly infested zone, the mineral horizon at the top, the A horizon, is now enriched in organic matter. So as a soil scientist studying carbon dynamics, I wonder how the overall soil carbon balance is affected by these changes. And here are my thoughts. So the carbon stored in the forest floor is completely disappearing because the forest floor is disappearing, and that's a huge carbon stock. There is more carbon in the mineral horizons that is probably coming from the litter and the forest floor. And also, earthworms create those aggregates that are enriched in organic matter and that are stable for carbon. So some of these processes are going to negatively affect carbon balance, and some of them are going to positively affect the carbon balance. And it's really hard to see what's going to be the result of these processes. And that is basically what I'm trying to do for my PhD. I just wanted to share with you a few things that I have found already in my research sites, just so you can see that it's happening in Alberta. And these two graphs are from EMIN, the research forest that the U of A has close to Peace Rivers. So we are in the boreal zone and on alluvial soils. As you can see on the left, the forest floor thickness is decreasing with invasion, and the carbon content is increasing after invasion for the surface mineral horizon. So this is A horizon. So it's basically showing exactly what was on the chart on the previous slide. These are pictures from my sites in Quebec. And as you can see on the left, we don't have earthworms yet. And we still see this forest floor delimited in red. And once we get to an advanced invasion on the right, the forest floor is just completely gone. So earthworm invasion is what we can consider as a disturbance for the boreal forest from an ecological perspective, but it's not the only one. In Western Canada, wildfires play a major role for ecosystem dynamics in the boreal zone. And because both earthworms and wildfires affect carbon stocks, it is important to consider their potential combined effects. So this figure is from a paper studying the combined effects of fire and earthworm invasion on forest floor carbon stocks for the boreal in Alberta. And according to their model, the combination of these two disturbances will decrease carbon storage in the long run, which is not good news, but it also shows that in ecology we have to look at different processes at the same time, because one can potentially cancel out the other. This is all I have for this lecture on soil fauna. I am extremely interested in soil fauna, as you can see from my master's and my PhD work. If you have questions, if you want to understand more, I'd be really happy to talk about that. So you can email me anytime. But here are the key points that I would like to remember from this earthworm part of the lecture. So in Canada, earthworms are invasive species. I think that's a very important key thing to remember. They might have a negative impact on the boreal forest, but we don't really know yet because we need more research. But my preliminary results are leaning towards that negative impact for the carbon stocks. Earthworms decrease the forest floor thickness, and because of that, it has a lot of consequences for the ecosystem equilibrium. And from all of these information, I think a good summary is that yes, earthworms are ecosystem engineers, but the terminology ecosystem engineer is not always positive for the ecosystem. And I think in the case of Canada, because these are invasive species, it's definitely negative. And then another interesting thing that I mentioned is this earthworm dilemma, that at the same time, yes, earthworms do increase CO2 emissions, but they also help stabilize carbon in the long run. So we can potentially benefit from that, hopefully. And yes, this is all I have. So because I don't get a chance to see you all again, I just wanted to tell you thank you. It was really nice seeing you this semester. I had a lot of fun. And if you need me for anything, like for this class, or if you're interested in potentially going to grad school or anything, don't hesitate to email me. I'd be happy to have a chance. Take care, everyone.